Hi, and welcome to another video by Get It Done Home Repairs. Today's project, we're going to be removing this backsplash from this wall and hopefully not damaging the drywall behind it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the drywall is going to be destroyed, but we're going to try to minimize it. We'll see how it actually goes before we decide to get in there and cut the entire piece of drywall out with the tiles. All right, so what we're going to do first before we do anything, we're going to make sure we have some kind of glasses to cover your eyes, because just in case any chips come out of it, you won't get any kind of a problem with your eyes. We're going to use something like this. We're going to use a pry bar to get behind it and pry out the tiles. We're going to use some scrapers possibly to try to get back behind it. We're going to need a screwdriver to remove the switch plates right here and down at the other side as well. We're also going to need a hammer to get in there and tap our chisel and pry bar in there, a piece of wood to put behind it, and I'll explain why we're using this wood as well. We may try getting behind the tile too with a reciprocating saw like this, just to get in there and see if we can minimize the damage to the drywall and not have to change the sheetrock. All right, but we're going to, God bless you. We're going to see how it goes as we proceed. Now, the piece of wood is here for a reason. When you get up on here and you try to pry on this tile here, as you can see, there's a stud there, a stud there. There's no stud behind this wall here. If we were to get in here with a hammer, get behind it and pry on it, we're going to knock a hole in this wall here and we'll have more damage to repair. So when you're in here prying with your hammer, such as this, or if you're in here with your pry bar in here behind the tile, you use that behind you and it'll minimize the amount of damage to the drywall above the area that we're working with. All right, as a precaution too, you want to put down something to cover your countertops, just in case you're using your you're just replacing the backsplash and you do not want to damage your countertop or your stovetop unit itself. All right, so enough said, let's get in there. Let's start right here and let's see what's going to happen. Now these are quite simple, of course. You just take the screws out. You probably want to get a piece of tape and tape these to the back of the plate itself, just so you don't misplace them and lose them. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to tape them in there. Let's take our other switch plate off. Okay, let me just point out one more thing to you here as well. Okay, so now we have our switch plate off. Of course, you can see that, but you see here how the electrical switch is sitting over the top of the tile. If you're going to be working in this area, make sure you go in and turn your circuit breaker off so that you have no electricity in here and you don't run the possibility of getting a shock. All right, so enough of that. Let's get up here and let's try taking these tiles off and we'll see how it goes. We're going to just try getting in here in the back of it with a hammer and a small scraper. Okay, so we can't get back in there like that. So then we have to have a starting point to get in here. So we're going to hit this tile right here and we're going to break them and we're going to see how they come off. So here we go. As you can see already, it looks like it is going to take the paper off, but we'll try it and we'll see. All right, so as you can see, it is going to take the paper off of everything. So at this point, we are going to wind up coming in here with our saw, and we're going to cut across this area right here. And we're going to probably change all of the drywall underneath here. But let's try this tile here and we'll see what happens on this one. Okay, see? You've taken all the drywall off with it. So chances are we're not going to be able to do anything on here except to replace the drywall itself. All right, so let's break a couple of these up so we can get in here with our saw and actually make some cuts. Okay, next we take our square just to put it up here. So we get a fairly straight line. It does not have to be perfect because as we know, we're going to do some drywall work anyway. And we're just going to cut it along here, all the way back to the cabinet itself. We're not going to touch the cabinet because we don't want to damage it, but we will score the sheetrock. All right, once we have our line, we're just going to continue cutting until it goes down through the sheetrock to the inside part of the wall. We're going to break a few more tiles away here so we can get in here, but we're not going to be careful because we know we're going to replace it. And the reason we're breaking this tile up is because we don't want to do any damage underneath here to the drywall itself, because we're not going to go behind the cabinet. So we'll get this out first. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to cut it down all the way down to here and then underneath the cabinet itself so that we have a good piece. We're going to have to break this tile up too so we can get a nice cut underneath there. Now remember, when you're cutting in the drywall with this saw, you don't want to cut too deep because remember, you have studs behind the wall and you also have electrical wiring. So you're only going to cut about a ½ inch into the drywall itself. Okay, so now we cut across the bottom right here. Next we're going to cut down here with the saw and then we'll take it out. Okay, so now we have it all cut. Let's grab it and give it a pull. Ready? And there we go. Oh, okay. Somebody buried a box back inside the wall here. And I'm assuming that that's when they moved it over to this point right here. So,
another project.
Yeah, another project. You can't bury your box inside the wall. It's got to be an exposed box, but we'll have to see about rewiring it just to go into this existing outlet right here. All right, so next thing we're going to do now is we're going to come underneath here. We're going to break these tiles on the bottom right here so we can cut a straight line across here so we have some place to install the new piece of drywall that we're going to put on. All right, so let me get this all down and then we'll come back. After looking in here, I can see that these wires now are dead wires. They've been removed someplace else. They've been disconnected, so I'm assuming that it was done correctly. We're going to come in here with our tester just to make sure that these wires are dead, and then we're just going to take that box out because there's no reason these wires are actually dead. All right, so let's get this down, and we'll come back once we have it all down. Okay, so as you can see, we have the drywall off, we have the tiles off. We did have to break it underneath the cabinet, chip out each one of the tiles because we needed to get back behind there with this saw here, this reciprocating saw. If you're doing any kind of work around the house, this comes in extremely handy. This one is made by DeWalt. As you know, I use a lot of DeWalt type products and it's been very dependable for me. But it saves you a lot of headaches. We had to cut down on the bottom where the drywall is touching into the countertop itself, and we were able to get under it and score the drywall, cut through it in order to remove it from the wall without destroying where the new drywall is going to touch into. So we're going to run to the big box store, pick up a piece of drywall and put it on here. Now before you pick up the drywall, measure the thickness of the wall that's there now. Some of them are 3/8, some are ½ inch, some could even be 5/8. So make sure you get the correct size drywall before you put it up. And the way you're going to do it, of course, you just grab your measuring tape, measure how thick the drywall is. This one here I think is it's 3/8 if I'm not mistaken, this one here, so that's what we're going to get. And then we'll put the drywall in and we'll tape it and spackle it. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to be putting in a tile backsplash on here, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have the finish coat over the top of it. All right, so let's clean up some of this mess right here, take a run to the big box store, and then we'll continue. Now, as you remember, there was an outlet right over here that had a wire just hanging in it. There was also, as we opened it up, we found out there was another previous outlet over here that had wires just hanging in it also. As it turns out, they were from the previous kitchen that was in here. They were disconnected already, so we removed the boxes, took the wiring out that was through here. There's no reason to leave the wiring in there, no reason to have the box in there, so we took those out, threw them away. The other wire was coming into this box over here. It was already disconnected. We just pulled it out and got rid of it, so that eliminated the box that was there. All right, so let's continue. Okay, so as you can see, we now have our piece of drywall in place. We did our calculations. We measured from the side over to the center of where the electrical box is, and then we cut out the box itself. We can fine tune it once we have it screwed back into the wall itself to make it exactly the size that we want it. We did the exact same thing on this side over here. we actually cut the box out there as well. And again, we'll fine tune that once we have this screwed back onto the wall where it belongs. This piece here we're going to cut in a minute. We'll put that back up as well. I just want to point this out to you. Make sure that your power supply is off because you're touching these and you don't want to get a shock. All right, so now after we have our drywall in place, we're going to take some drywall screws, and you're probably going to use something 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches, something like that, to hold it in, because the drywall itself is 1/2 inch, and we have about 1 inch of it going into the stud itself. Now with these here, you can use a regular drill. You don't need to have any special tool to put the drywall screws in, and you basically just hold it in place, know where your stud is located, and you come up in here like this and you just drive this through. And you want to dimple it in just a little bit. You want to dimple it in. You don't want to have the screw sticking out past the drywall. And of course, we're actually going to put tape up here once we put that other piece in. So this will be underneath the tape joint, this screw here. So now we're going to come down, and we know where our studs are located. And we're going to come in here, and we're going to put a screw. Just like that. And then we'll continue all the way down the line here. We're going to put a screw here. We're going to put a screw down on the bottom. You don't need a lot of screws in here. You can put either 2 or you can put 3 screws, whatever you prefer. I'm probably going to use 3 because I do everything to the best I can. All right, so let's screw this in place. We'll cut this sheet right here and we'll put that in, and I'm going to show you how to spackle it and finish this job off. Okay, so now after we have the drywall up, we have the screws all screwed in place, we have our filler piece up on here. The next thing is we're going to come in here and we're going to tape this, we're going to spackle it and tape it so that way the joints are finished. Now, you know there's going to be a microwave up here and there's going to be tiling down here, so these joints here do not have to be perfect. If it's going to be something that's going to be exposed, then you'll need to finish it so that it's perfectly smooth, which I will attach another video of how to finish off drywall for painting in the future. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here with our all-purpose spackle, and we're going to put it in this joint all along here, all of the joints. We're going to put drywall spackle on. Then we're going to take our tape, and we're going to put the tape into the spackle that's on here, and it'll actually dry in there, and that way if there's any kind of flexing, it's not going to crack in there. It'll be a perfect joint. All right, so let's get in there and let's do that. All right, after you have a coat of spackle on here, then you grab your tape, just stretch it across. You see how long you're going to need it. We'll cut it to length, and then that just gets stuck right on to the joint where everything is going to go now. And you just push it into it. Just make sure your membrane is embedded into the drywall spackle that you just put on. All right, and that's it. We're going to continue. We're going to do it up on the rest here. We're going to do it underneath the cabinet, down on the bottom right there. We'll do it on these joints here, and then this will be finished. But now let me show you, when you have just a screw in there, what you can do. You don't need to make a big deal of that. You just go like this, and that's all. And that's it. So let me finish the rest of this and I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like once we get the tape on and the rest of the spackle in place. Alright, so now that we have our drywall up, we put our tape on, we put the spackle over the top of it, and we covered all of the screw holes with the spackling all-purpose joint compound. If you were going to finish the wall, like I said, you will need to come in here and sand it lightly and put a second coat on here, but this wall is going to be tiled all the way up. There's going to be a microwave there, so I'm not going to have to finish this wall, so that's absolutely perfect. But that's it. We're going to put our switch plate covers back on because we have a project to do on the other side of the room now, and then we'll come back to this once we're ready to tile it. I'll make another video and you can see how to put the tile up. Today's project, we're going to be putting tile on this backsplash over here. Alright, so we already picked up the tile, we already picked up the mastic, and now we're going to come in here and we're going to start putting everything down. A couple things you're going to need before you get started. Let me just show you real quick. Of course, you're going to need the tile you're going to be installing. You're going to need some tape to put onto the countertop down here so you don't scratch the tile that you're going to be working over a new countertop. So we're going to put a little bead of tape here to make sure that the surface doesn't get scratched. Of course, we have something down on top of the counter so it doesn't scratch the new counter that we have installed. We're going to use what's called the spacer underneath the bottom, so we could put our first course down in here like this, put it on here like that, and then bring the level up on top of the first course to make sure that it's perfectly level. All right, it's personal preference if you want to come in here and you want to. Let me just get this like that. All right, so we put these underneath here to create the height along here. So we're going to do that on our first course, so we make sure that that first course is perfectly straight along the top, and that's what our level is for. So we're going to put our first course in here, we're going to put a level on it and make sure it's perfectly level. If we need to adjust the height up or down or whatever we need to do, these shims, just so you know, you can cut them off to make them a little higher or a little lower as needed. All right, so that's how you get your first course in there, and it'll be perfectly straight. Next thing we're going to need is we're going to need a trowel to spread the mastic against the wall itself up in this area here. And we're going to be using a trowel such as this here. This one is a 3/16 inch trowel, which is what we need for this particular job. Depending on the size of the tile, it'll depend on the size of the notch that you're going to need. These are actually smaller tiles, as you can see. They're really not that big. They're probably, whatever, 8 inches by 2.5, 3 inches. So that will be fine for this particular application. Now these are going to be sitting on top of each other. There's going to be no spacers in between, but that's personal preference. If you choose to put spacers in between the tiles to create a bigger grout joint, you could pick these up in the big box store according to whatever you choose to have the space in between the tiles itself. All right, so first thing we're going to do now is we're going to come in here, we're going to take this outlet off here so we can get in here and get our first course set, and then we're going to start. Okay, I just want to point this out to you about the tape. The tape is going to go actually right like this. It's not going to be under the tile where the tile is going to go. We're just going to have it sitting just like that. So that way when we have to pull this tape off, it'll peel out from underneath the bottom without being stuck on the bottom and causing a problem trying to get it out. All right, so we're going to do this on here, and then we'll continue on down the line over there, and then we'll get started. Okay, so now we have our first course just temporarily set in there. We just wanted to make sure that there was a nice, straight, even line for the countertop. And as you can see, it's nice and level right now. All right, what we did is we cut a corner bead right here, and we're going to actually use the mastic to put that in position right there. We're going to make our first cut down on this corner right over in here on our tile. We're going to cut that first tile over here so that the first cut will be in that corner right there. And just so you know, we're going to cut one of those pieces of metal right there, and we're going to put it right in that corner as well. All right, so let me cut that metal, and we'll get started, and we'll get these tiles on. Next, we're going to pull the tiles off that we temporarily put on there with some tape. We're going to lay them down on the cover that we have protecting the countertop. We're going to put some mastic on the back of the tile itself. We spread it with a regular trowel, and then we come in with our 3/16 V-notch trowel, and we'll put the grooves into it so that we actually can have it stick on to the wall properly. All right, so now we're going to back butter it. We're going to use the trowel. We're going to put some mastic onto the wall itself. Then we're going to grab our trowel again, and we're going to go the opposite direction that we have that we have on the tile itself. We're going to go up and down versus the other one that we went horizontal. This will take off any excess mastic that's there, and it'll give us some space for the two tile and the mastic that we put on the wall to bond together. Next, we're going to take our tiles, we're going to put them onto the wall. We're going to put the tile, set it into the mastic, and then we're going to move it back and forth and up and down just to work out any air bubbles that may be inside there. Then we're going to move on down the line, and we're going to do the same thing to the tile next to it, making sure that we put our spacers underneath it so that we keep it a nice straight line for the first course of tile. Now here you can see we have our spacers underneath the bottom of it. We're going to clean off any of the mastic that was on top of the tile itself, because it's a lot easier cleaning out the mastic now while it's not dry than later on trying to get the grout in there, and it won't go in because the mastic is dried into a hard film inside there that won't allow it in there. All right, so we'll continue down the line. We'll back butter each one of the tiles, and then we'll put them all in place. Okay, now as I mentioned, when we put the tiles in one at a time, make sure you put your spacers underneath the bottom so you have a nice straight line for the first course. We're going to take off any of the excess mastic that's on there. We'll continue down, we'll put the last couple of tiles in there, and then don't forget we're going to have to go to that one in the corner. We're going to have to cut it down to size. So we'll mark the tile where it needs to be cut, and we have a wet saw that we're going to take in the garage, and we'll cut the tile to fit into the opening. So let's measure it up and let's get in the garage and cut it down to size. Okay, so next we're going to make a straight cut now. We need to cut off this piece of the tile right here, and the way you do that is you come in here with your saw and you'll make a cut about an inch into here, maybe a little bit more, and then we'll flip it over and we'll cut from the other side just so that the tile doesn't crack crooked. All right, so let's do that. Cut from the other side. Remember, you want to cut nice and slow. Right, and now we have a nice clean cut right here. Let's take it inside and put it in. Okay, so before everything gets set and the adhesive starts to dry, we make sure our first course is nice and level, and now from this point on, it's just a matter of repetition. All right, so let's cut that tile for that one corner over there, and then we'll come right back and get that corner in. Okay, so we cut our tile to give it a 50% offset, which basically means that the tile is going to go 50% of the tile below it. All right, so we cut this off on our wet saw, and now we're going to take this and stick this in here, and then we'll put our next row down through here. So let's continue with that. Okay, so once the tile goes onto the wall, before the mastic dries in between where the grout is supposed to go, we're going to come in there with a screwdriver, a utility knife, whatever you have to make sure we clean out that grout joint so it doesn't dry in there, because once it dries in there, it's going to be extremely difficult to get the the grout in there to make it look uniform. You don't want the white coming through. If you wanted to have a gap in between here, or you wanted to have a thicker grout joint, now is when you would put in your spacers in here, but I chose to have a very small grout joint, just so you know. All right, let's continue down the line, and we'll put the rest of the tiles in, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, now this tile, we're going to need to cut it to go around this outlet right here. So let's get a pencil, let's mark this, and then we'll take it in the garage and we'll cut it out. Okay, so we went into the garage and we cut the tile so that way it accommodates the box itself, and this is where the screw is going to go in to screw this electrical outlet back onto the wall here. So this is how it's going to go, just like this. It lines up with the outside of the box here, and the screw can go in through there. All right, so let's put this on and we'll continue down the line with the rest of the tiles too. All right, next we come along, make sure we clean out the joints. Make sure we have any of the mastic out of there so the grout can go in without a problem once it dries. A utility knife is good to get in between the tiles. You can clean everything out really well with that. Okay, we'll just continue down, clean all the rest of the mastic off. Okay, so now we have all our tiles in place. We're going to let the mastic dry overnight, and then we'll come back and we'll grout the joints. As I said before, make sure that you take all of the mastic inside here that may be in the joints. Take it out now because tomorrow it's going to be really hard and it's going to interfere with the grout going in. All right, so once this dries, we'll come back, we'll grout it, and we'll finish this off. Okay, so now that everything is dried thoroughly, we're going to come in here and we're going to do the grouting of the joints themselves. Now I'm going to show you what kind of tools you're going to need, and we're going to get this job done. But I do want to bring out one thing. I hear this all the time from people. How do you know if you need sanded or unsanded grout? A good rule of thumb is that if you have a tile joint that's between a 1/16 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch, you use unsanded grout, and that's what we're using right here is unsanded. If you have a thicker joint, anywhere from an 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch or whatever, then you would use sanded grout. All right, so a couple things you're going to need is you're going to need a couple of rags, of course. You're going to need something to install to put the grout in between the joints. Now, they do sell a float to come in here and do this, but a float to me is really big, and to work in this area with a float, it's a little bit a little bit too big. So what I use is a small rubber piece like this. This is actually for a sanding block. I use this to install the grout into the joints themselves. You're going to need a couple of sponges, of course, to clean off any excess. We are going to use a disposable container to mix the grout in because I don't want to have to clean it out. We're just going to throw it away when we're finished, and a bucket of clean water. All right, so first thing we'll do now is let's mix this grout so there's a sort of like a peanut butter consistency, and then we'll go ahead and put this in and we'll get this done. Okay, so you want to mix it until it's thoroughly mixed so that you have no dry spots in there. And then you want to let this stand for about 5 minutes just so that all of the, that it's all thoroughly saturated throughout. All right, so we're just going to mix this all up just like this. Now, I would recommend that when you're doing this, don't do the entire backsplash area. What you want to do is you want to do a small section, and then you come in there with a damp sponge or rag or whatever to clean out any kind of residual grout that's on the tile itself. As I said, you wanted to make sure that all of these joints in here were all nice and clean and that there was nothing in them. All right, so let's let this sit for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll get this started. Okay, so what I normally do is just take some of this, put it on the float that I'm using here, and you come in here and you just push it into the joints, and make sure when you push it, you push the grout into the joints so it actually fills up the entire grout joint. As I said, I like using this rubber float here or sanding block because you don't scratch the tile itself. You could use a trowel or a scraper such as this to do it, but you run the possibility of scratching the tile itself. All right, so we're just going to keep doing this. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you as well, let me just get this off here and we'll talk for a second. Down on the very bottom, down here, where this comes in contact with the countertop, that's not going to be grout. That's going to be silicone there. So we're going to fill the sides up all the way, but we are not going to fill this up down the bottom here. This will be silicone, and that'll be a later date once this dries off thoroughly. We'll come in here and we'll silicone the bottom right there. If you're trying to put the grout in between the tiles and you find out there's some mastic still in there that's going to cause the grout not to go in properly, you want to get in there with a utility knife and take it out so that way the grout can go into all the joints the way it's supposed to. All right, so any mastic, make sure you remove it. I always try to take off whatever we can scrape off with the float. We take it off so that it's out of there. There's less to clean later on. We just fill in all around all the other joints just like that. Now, if you're going to be close to a cabinet and you don't want to get any kind of grout onto the cabinet itself, you can put the painter's tape in the up on the counter or up on the cabinet to keep from getting it on there if you choose to. All right, well, you get the idea now. We're just going to finish off this one side, and then we'll come back in here and we'll clean off the tiles themselves before it dries. Okay, so now when you're putting the grout in between the tiles, if you are worried about damaging the countertop, with the tool or with the grout, by all means you can put a painter's tape down there to reduce the possibility of damaging anything. And also you can do it up on the top where the cabinet is going to be meeting into the tile. You could put the painter's tape up there as well. Now when you remove the grout, I'm just going to tell you this because it's happened before, and I've gotten emails from people asking me, how do you get the grout off the tile? Once it has dried on there, it doesn't come off. The answer to that is there is no easy way to get it off. The best thing to do is to only work in small sections, enough to get in there and clean the tile face off before it dries. Because once it dries, believe me, you're going to have such a hard time. If you're even able to get it off, it's going to be a real pain in the rear end to do it. So make sure you only work in small sections. Get that grout in there. Once you finish, you grab your float, get up, and if it's a rubber float, I might add, and you clean off any of the excess grout laying on the top of the tile, clean it out, and then you come in with your rag and you can continue cleaning it off with a damp rag to get any of the excess off the face of the tile itself before it dries. Okay, now we'll just let this stand for a minute. We'll get our bucket of water and the sponge, and we'll come in here and clean it off a little bit. Okay, so now we'll grab our sponge, we'll come in here, we're going to clean it off. Now I want to point this out to you too. Of course, when you're taking off any of the grout that's on the tile itself, you don't want to wipe the grout out of the in between the tiles where it's supposed to be. So you're pretty much just rubbing it across the surface to clean off any excess that's laying on top of the tile itself. So that way, once it dries, it'll be nice and clean. Now you're probably going to have to go and dump the bucket quite a few times just to make sure that you have clean water in there, because the worst thing you can do is to clean off the tile with a dirty bucket of water, and you'll wind up having that haze or fog or the dust when it dries on the tile itself. When you dump this, you don't want to dump it down the drain because this is cement, and if you dump it down the drain, you know what's going to happen. You're going to wind up with a drain that's clogged, and you're going to really be kicking yourself. So make sure you dispose of it properly and definitely not down the drain. All right, so we're going to continue. We're not going to work the joints, as I said. We're just going to clean off all the excess that's on the tile itself. And then once this dries thoroughly, we come in here with a dry rag, and we'll buff the tiles to get the dust that dried on there off so that it doesn't leave that film on top of it. Now, if you have any areas that you put the grout in and you see it's a little bit low or a little bit high, then of course you can come in here and you can add to it, or you can take it out with the sponge so that it's all uniform throughout the entire backsplash itself. As I said, working with this, be very careful, because if you let it dry too long, you will not be able to get this grout off the tile. You'll be kicking yourself for not doing it sooner. So just work with a small section at a time. And once you have that section cleaned, then you can continue down the line and do the rest of the work or installing of the grout in the rest of the tiles itself. So we're going to clean this off. We're going to grab a fresh bucket of water and we'll clean it off real good. And then we'll come back and we're going to go ahead and put the rest of the grout in the other tiles. Okay, well, you get the idea. We're just going to come in here. We're going to clean these tiles off really well. We're going to let it sit for a little bit longer. After we clean it off with another bucket of fresh water, we're going to let this sit, and then we're going to move on to the next section. Once it gets a little bit of a film on it, we'll come in with a rag, and we'll just buff off whatever's there. All right, so let me finish that up, and we'll come back, and we'll see what it looks like. All right, so before we go any further with that backsplash down behind me over here, we're going to come in here. We did this with 2 buckets of water. We cleaned it off to get all of the residual grout on the tile off. We let it dry now, and there's a little bit of a haze on top of the tile, which is actually the dust from the grout that's dried up on there. Now, before it dries 100%, where it's going to be very difficult to get off, just grab yourself a rag and come in here and you buff the tile to get everything off. Any of the dust that's on the tile once it sets is really tough to get off. All right, but that's it. This job here is done. As I said, we are going to silicone down on the very bottom, right over in here, but that'll be in another day or so after this thoroughly dries. We'll come back and we'll grout it. All right, that's it. This job is done, and we're on to the next one. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.